Right, I have an album review. Shoot. I know I keep forgetting. I just, you know, I just get too into it. Um, yeah. Anyway.
Hello, y'all. It's Kyle Parker here, back at it again with another album review. And this week, we are reviewing Hymns and Dissonance by Whitechapel. And this is their newest album. Granted, not really that new because it came out last year, but I just wanted to choose this album because out of all of the stuff I've listened to this week, this album stood out to me the most. Let's get right into it. So I should also preface, I never haven't really listened to that much Whitechapel. This is the only album from them I've listened to, so I'm just gonna be going based off of my perceptions of it, just what I heard and from the production standpoint, and also just hear just compare it to some of the other deathcore contemporaries I've listened to, including the newer bands or the newer bands that have been taking the deathcore world by storm. So anyway, let's get right into it. So I really like a lot of different things about this album. I like the production of it. The production in it is really good. Although initially I had a little bit of an issue with it. So for an example, the song Prisoner 666 has this really massive tom part that comes in, or like drum tom thing coming in. And there's also, if you listen close enough to it, there are some guitars and some other instruments in there too. I was actually listening to this on studio monitors, by the way, just to specify. And I felt like for the most part at the beginning of that song, other than that little octave part thing that they were doing that transitions to the tom fill, I felt that it was a little drowned out a bit. But I think after that though, the mix started to kind of get a little better. But I think another issue that I had with it was that the snare kind of got drowned out. But after that song and all these subsequent songs that came after, I felt like the production kind of or mixing got a little better, which is always a nice plus for me. Which, speaking of the toms in themselves just sound super massive in the mix. They sound really good. There's a lot of. I would not be surprised if there were some drum triggers that were involved that kind of that contributed to that sound, because that is a very common practice in deathcore and lots of styles of extreme metal. And I really liked how it dialed everything was, especially some of the more wall of sound-ish kind of moments. There's also some parts in there that are have a little bit of a Swedish death metal kind of guitar tone to them, which, as somebody that's a fan of bands like Entombed, At the Gates, Bloodbath, stuff like that, I was really appreciative of those influences. Also loved like the riffage in songs like Diabolic Slumber, and I love the breakdowns, just that like almost muted kind of progression there just sounds so massive and so nasty. I was kind of doing like the Jens Kidman like Meshuggah stank face, if you know what I'm talking about. I'll probably put a picture of it here somewhere. I also noticed in my research too that this album is actually a concept album. So the concept being is the album is centered around a cult. And the cult is basically just doing all these really horrific things, committing all these like acts of violence and stuff. And then there's a point, and the main character of this story has a brother as well. And his brother doesn't. And from this is just from my understanding, obviously. The brother doesn't really want to partake in those horrific actions so much as the main character, or in this case, our protagonist does. So then he basically just curses him and basically insults him for not being as devoted to the cult, which then the album culminates with the main character being consumed by those horrible crimes that he committed in the name of said cult. The reason why I mention this is because to me, when it comes to concept albums, I think it's important for a concept album, regardless of whether it has an underlying story or maybe each song has a certain theme to it, it should have a good flow. And Hymns and Dissonance, conceptually or sonically, has a great flow. There's a very clear progression and story going on throughout this whole thing. It just didn't really feel like it was slowing down. The pacing was good. I view this like I'm reading a book basically. I love the pacing and the feel of it. It didn't again, like I said, it never felt like the album overstayed its welcome or anything. There's also some other really cool parts too, like in Hate Cult Ritual, there's like this really weird like 6/8 kind of swing to it, which at the beginning has these layered, almost not choir vocals, but more so like deathcore layered vocals, and I love that vibe because it actually felt cultish. Which again, coming back to that concept, I think that's really important that they wanted to hammer that in. Just those little things that they add contribute so much to the overall feel and vibe of that album. And I also really liked a lot of the guitar solos, but the guitar solo in Mammoth God I thought was really cool. The wah effect was interesting because I don't really hear that so much in deathcore. Or at least I don't notice it because obviously I'm not primarily a guitar player. I'm a bass player. So I'm kind of listening just to how the bass usually listening to how the bass contributes to those arrangements because the bass usually does a lot when you're in certain bands. So I thought that was really sick. And I also really liked the way the album ended. The album had a really cool, delay heavy guitar part that kind of just had like a little bit of a fade, not like a fade out, but something similar to that. And I felt that was a really good touch or conclusion to the album. And overall, I was pretty satisfied with it. This album is a great mix of Swedish death metal, black metal, and many other kinds of influences. The production is very massive and in your face, and the songs themselves are extremely unforgiving with very little room for reprieve. In the scene of deathcore where everyone else tries to be like Lorna Shore, which to mention, I love Lorna Shore. I'm just saying it as it is. There are bands like Whitechapel, which of course is part of the big four of deathcore, that are still honoring that classic deathcore sound while also still pushing the boundaries of the genre and still figuring out ways on like, oh, how can we make our sound stand out in this current landscape? How can we keep going at it? It just feels like that they still have a lot of steam to blow off, and I'm excited for their next releases. So this is going to be probably a pretty high ranking because like I said, this is the only album I've listened to from Whitechapel, so I may change it in the future. I would rate this album a 9.8 out of 10. That's it for my review. Thank you guys for watching this video, and I'm going to go read now. Bye.